and welcome to the Abundology podcast. My name is Renee Spears. I'm here today with Tiffany Thoen, who is an RN and an intuitive eating coach. So I'm excited to talk with you today because, one, I have no idea what intuitive eating even is. But before we go into what we're talking about today, we wanted to just take a moment to recognize what's happening outside in our world right now. With the murder of George Floyd, of course, and the Black Lives Matters movement that right now is really shifting our world. I have to say this is like a pivotal moment in our evolution for us to be able to wake up and see some of the things, perhaps inequities that we didn't see before. So how about could we just take like 5 minutes, just a quick breath, and in honor of George Floyd and all the other people that have passed at the hands of the police. So.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we are going to talk about intuitive eating today. And it seems like this is a weird topic to talk about during this time because there seems like there's bigger things out in the world happening. But let's start with, what exactly is intuitive eating?
Yeah. So, well, first I want to thank you for having me on, and thank you for taking that moment of honoring. In my work, we really want to, kind of allow all emotions and move toward uncomfortable feelings, right? And so taking that time to sit with the discomfort and move toward what's happening instead of bracing away is so important and so valuable. It's something that I'm committed to, and I want to kind of join others who are also committed to that. So I appreciate that. And yeah, there are some ways in which intuitive eating is kind of connected to what's happening in the world. Intuitive eating, really, a goal of intuitive eating is to dismantle diet culture. And diet culture is one of those systems that really keeps, marginalized groups down, women and then people of color disproportionately. And so while I don't want things to be business as usual, I am of course passionate about this topic, and there are some ways in which it is very connected. And so I'd love to explore that a little bit more. But what is intuitive eating?
Yeah.
I feel like this is like the number one question. It's actually been around for 25 years. There were a couple of dietitians, and lately their names both start with E, and so I get them like one last name connected to the wrong name. But I can certainly put a link to their book in the bio. But Elise Resch and Evelyn Tribole wrote. There are a couple of dietitians. They wrote this book, and they really came up with the intuitive eating model. It's a set of 10 principles. They came up with this model based on research and their own clinical experience of seeing that the current way that we handle diet and weight and people's relationships with food was harmful. And so the idea is to really let go of diet culture and shoulds around food and your body, the food police and kind of all of these like shoulds that we have in our brain, and move toward feeling more connected to our body, really being able to be in tune with our body's signals, so hunger and fullness signals, the emotions and sensations that we're having, our desires, like what do we actually enjoy, how do these foods actually make us feel, right? So getting really connected or attuned to our body, and then really making choices that nourish and nurture us through that process. So then we start, in the later principles, we start looking at honoring our body, respecting our body, honoring our health, starting to find ways to incorporate joyful movement, right? And so really learning to care for ourselves on a really deep level.
Yeah, that's great. So as a society, and especially women, we have definitely had a really fucked up view of diets and eating and our bodies and what we feel about ourselves and all of that. And I know that we talked about this before, that there was a really great book that you said that you had read that went into this a little bit and explained some of the culture behind it.
Yeah, honestly, I have I have not actually read the book, but I've been
Oh,
following the
okay.
author. Yeah,
Okay.
I've ordered the book.
Yay.
Yeah, and so Renee, I want to make sure, Sonia Renee Taylor, she wrote a book called The Body is Not an Apology. And you know, she's a woman of color, and and the cover is just stunning. It's her like laying in in this bed of petals, right? And the petals are kind of covering the parts that have to be covered, but you know, you kind of see her in all her glory. And so the idea is, and this is kind of where I was saying, kind of these systems are harmful to all of us, and that there are racist roots with these systems, because the idea is that larger bodies are bad, right? And so, you know, we should try to shrink our bodies. And that's kind of the idea that's perpetuated by diet culture. And I love that you just call it out, like, yeah, it's fucked up. Like the way that we have all, anyway, but definitely follow Renee, or Sonia Renee Taylor on Instagram. And, you know, I ordered her book directly from her website. It is not sold out. So, you know, if you're interested in kind of looking at it from that perspective, I highly recommend her work. All that being said, you know, what I see more than anything is how much self-criticism and self-loathing this system perpetuates. And, you know, women just walking around spending so much mental and emotional energy thinking about what they should and shouldn't be eating, and how they're bad or wrong because they ate something, and how, you know, or they're bad or wrong because of the number on the scale, or because their pants are a little snug today, and how much energy that sucks from us.
Yes. If I think about, now that I'm older, certainly when I was younger in my 20s and 30s, I taught aerobics, and that was part of the culture. It was a very, very unhealthy eating culture at that time. But now that I'm older, and I'm realizing that my friends and I are kind of giving up all of this, like we should or shouldn't eat this, we feel bad, you know, we're going on vacation, we got to lose the 10 pounds. And I cannot believe, as I look back over my life, how much energy that I have spent on some of this stuff that is absolutely ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. It is modeled for us. It's ingrained in us, right?
Yeah.
As a culture, our value is definitely on external, you know, how do you look? What do you, even what do you achieve? What do you, you know, all of these things. And so, I think it's very much disproportionately harmful to women, and how we, yeah, like we're just expected to always be, if we're not on a diet, we're supposed to be thinking about how we should be on a diet, or right,
Yeah, exactly.
like always striving for this like perfection, or you know, conforming to what the current kind of beauty ideal or standard is set by culture, right?
Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
true. So true. And I could see how that would be even more harmful for the Black community,
Yeah.
or, you know, where their body shapes are different in different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of acknowledging that and celebrating it, we shame it, you know.
Absolutely. Yes. And so, you know, actually right now I'm reading, while I kind of wait for a bunch of other books that I'm getting, but I'm reading Women Who Run with the Wolves from the
Yes.
70s. Yeah.
Yes, I love that book.
Yeah. And she has an entire chapter devoted to, you know, like shaming bodies, and how carving up our bodies and trying to like contort and fit our bodies into this kind of cultural, you know, ideal is likened to, you know, it's there's a wound that's reflected in our culture, and there's a wound that's reflected. So for every wound that we have around that, it's reflected in our culture, and it's reflected on our earth. And it's such a powerful, like, wow, that's incredible the way that she puts that out there. And she talks about, you know, I haven't actually looked up a picture of her, but based on what she talks about in the book, I believe she's Latina, and how you know, she kind of talks about like having a more solid, like lower body, and how that's meant to carry all of these stories and be connected to the
Oh,
earth, and how beautiful that is, right? And then she talks about having
yeah.
this friend who's like tall and slender, and the friend has a gap in her teeth, and the gap, you know, in our culture was kind of, she was treated poorly about that. But when she went and connected with her, you know, more ancestral culture, they said that lets God shine through. And it was like,
Ah,
oh man, This book, I have like underlined almost every word in the book, right?
And just imagine how different our culture would be if our children heard these things and were able to recognize their differences as empowering and wonderful things versus being an outcast and they don't fit in. And yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. How, and this is, it's interesting. I'm glad we're talking a little bit about the current landscape and Black Lives Matter in particular. And this is kind of the problem, I think, with the idea of when people say I don't see color, right, is that we want to see and celebrate each other. And if we don't see someone, we don't see their experience, right? And so anyway, so that phrase in particular has been really kind of echoing for me in my mind exactly what you're talking about. If we can instead really see the beauty in each person and honor, and it's not the like, I'm not talking about the like, curves are beautiful and all of that, because that's still kind of making our value and our worth be tied to, it's expanding the cultural,
Right.
what's accepted, right? But it's still like, well, you still have to kind of look a certain way for that to apply to you, right? And so instead, looking at honoring each individual and really seeing that they have unique qualities and that's wonderful for our world, right?
For our world, exactly. Now, I imagine during this time, and I know it's true for me and many of my girlfriends, one of the ways that people deal during stressful situations, and talk about a year, huh? With everything we've had going on. Oh my goodness. But I imagine right now is a time where, a lot of people are self-soothing with food.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you seeing that?
Yes, absolutely. So I personally have experienced some of this, and I hear it from clients, and I'm seeing it all over social media, right? And yeah, friends, I'm having people reach out that never even really felt like they had trouble in their relationship with food, saying like, I don't know what's going on, or I haven't had these kind of problems since I was a teenager, whatever it is. And so what happens when we're stressed is that we tend to go back to old tendencies, right? So if you're someone who has had disordered eating in the past, it, maybe really like kind of coming back with a vengeance right now.
Yes.
But there's a couple of reasons for soothing using food. People say sometimes like, oh, it's bad, but if you think about a baby, if you're a baby and you cry, you're held and then fed, right? Like that's a really nurturing, loving thing. And so of course we have a biological positive association with food, right? When your cortisol is elevated, you're going to have an increased desire for food, carbs in particular. And so you might find yourself craving sweets or, chips or things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so anytime we're stressed, anytime we're kind of in that, automatic stress response, it's going to throw off our circadian rhythms. It's going to throw off all of those. And we're going to be looking for that quick energy because our body thinks that, we need to be prepared to like run at any time, or we need to be prepared. So we're going to stock up on the carbs right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's actually really adaptive and really normal. And I find that also right now we have this really unusual thing happening in that most of us are home a lot. So we have, really easy access to the kitchen all the time. And we don't have a lot of other things happening. And so we're able to like hyper scrutinize ourselves. And we're also kind of lacking stimulation. So we're looking for some sort of stimulation. So food is stimulating, right?
Right.
So it's a really unusual time, and it's really compounding any, patterns with food that already didn't feel good. They're like through the roof right now, right?
Can you give us some tips and hints on some ways that we could perhaps manage this a little bit better? I don't want to, go full on the macaroni and cheese. Are there some things that you can suggest that might help us?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So in the intuitive eating world, the number one thing we do is let go of judgment and get really curious. And so if you're finding yourself, I want mac and cheese every single day, or I'm finding myself like eating beyond fullness regularly, or I just find myself kind of like feeling dissatisfied and just grazing all the time, right? really look at what's going on. And again, kind of that like moving away and moving toward, right? Bracing away from things and moving toward. So if you find yourself kind of bracing away from all of the emotions you're having right now and just, really like, or just trying to like push through and get through the day and kind of compartmentalize everything, that's gonna later come out, right? We need to be able to really allow. And so how can we get really curious about what's going on for me, really get curious about the patterns that are happening. And then I'd also recommend just some practical, like, if you're feeling like all you want to eat is, some processed food, but then you don't feel well.
Right.
Again, like, okay, I don't need to have judgment about doing that. It makes sense given what's going on and how I'm feeling, but also like, I don't feel great. And so allowing ourselves to notice like, yeah, this is making me have a headache, or because the more we kind of notice those not great consequences or whatever, right, the more we can be like, oh, okay, that's not working for me all the time. Sure, I'm still sometimes going to eat the, whatever food it is that's causing the problem, but I'm also going to have some veggies, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I actually just ordered Hungry Root, and it's been interesting. It's like a delivery service that they deliver like, a lot of veggies, and they have more kind of plant-based options. And I'm not a vegetarian, but I like lentils and whatever too.
Sure. Yeah.
So anyway, they sent me, and I wasn't on top of it already. It's like delivery number 2, right? So I've got like an overabundance of veggies, but actually, so I've just been kind of like, oh, yeah, that does sound good. And I'll just, have some veggies and with my whatever. Like yesterday for lunch, I had sauteed veggies and lentils, and it was tasty. And actually I am feeling more well, right? And so no judgment about, whatever I ate last night while I was watching the, documentary or whatever.
Right, exactly.
But I'm going to have some additive, and they don't even have to be super formal goals, but like I'm going to actually cook myself, meals. That's one thing I've been doing during this time. I have more time at home. I'm just going to prepare all my meals for myself, right? So adding in goals and again, just getting really curious about what's going on and how am I actually feeling.
And maybe perhaps even like sitting with the discomfort that we're feeling now. I know a lot of us are avoiding that, in any way that we can. Let me eat the mac and cheese so I don't look at what is happening in the world and how that's affecting me in my life.
Yeah.
So
yeah, absolutely. Feeling your feelings, allowing for all emotions and sensations is one of the most important, for me, it's been one of the most important things to really heal my relationship with myself. And it's been one of the most important things in, healing trauma and self-forgiveness and, just really allowing. I don't want to a lot of the time either.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable. There's a reason we don't want to.
Right.
But creating space for that, and I think it's scary. People think that I will never quit crying, or I'll never, if I let myself feel it, but most of the time, if we just allow those feelings, then we can move through them, right?
Absolutely. And I like to do it, for me, it works to do it in chunks. Like I'm feeling really angry right now. For the next half hour, I'm going to just be as angry as I can.
Love it.
So I know that I don't stay stuck in anger. I'm allowing myself to feel the feelings with a time period. And then, there have been some times when there's like 5 minutes left and I still am feeling like that, and I'll just be jumping around, getting it out. So having a time period totally works for me as a goal, to be able to allow myself to feel it without feeling like I may get trapped there. I may go to anger or sadness or whatever and, stay there for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, when that isn't really what I want to do. I want to feel my feelings, feel discomfort, like you're saying, and then move on, move on with the day. And yes, exactly. And deal with it. Yeah. So, going back to the overeating now, if we've had food issues in the past, first off, is there such thing as a food addiction?
Okay, so this is a great question. So I'm actually in recovery from substances and alcohol. So I've been sober for 22 years. Oh, well, on the 12th, it will be 22 years. So anniversary coming up for me. And so I'm very interested in this topic. And so I've actually done a lot of research. And what the research shows right now, first off, a lot of the research is really biased. doesn't control for restriction. So if you've been restricting, you're going to have an increased desire for certain foods. And it also doesn't always control for other, like, how much, like with mice, how much interaction are they having? How much fun do they get to have? Like, are they just stuck in a white cage?
Oh.
Do they have other people with them, right? These things. So we're not necessarily looking at kind of an unencumbered experience, right? And then the other piece of it is that food, it's not the same as other addiction. It does not it doesn't hijack your neurobiology the same way. And so yes, absolutely, it increases dopamine, but so does, playing with a baby. I was just sitting outside and my neighbor walked by with the dog, and the dog just like came over and loved on me. And, I totally got like a hit of like all the feel good hormones from that, right? But I'm not like chasing the dog around, right?
Good point. Good point. Yeah.
So, yes, it increases dopamine. Chewing actually releases serotonin, right? Like it does give us feel good hormones, but it doesn't, like with substances, it kind of makes it so that nothing else can fill that, right? There's, it upregulates, and, you can, if you ever see the diagrams, it's like these little carrots that only fit the right, holes, right? And so food doesn't work the same way. And there's problems with like the food addiction scale, because it's all subjective. It's all self-reported. The language they use, like when we say like, oh, I'm a food addict, or, oh, I just can't quit eating these things, or I'm an emotional overeater. No one's looking at the actual diagnostic criteria when they say that, right? We just kind of throw those terms around.
Right.
So then if you ask someone like, have you ever felt obsessed about food? They'll say, oh yeah, but what are we really talking about? Are people losing their jobs because they want candy bars? Like, there actually may be a small percentage of the population that does have that, but for the majority of people, if you're needing to use food to soothe, then we need to do something to, reduce your stress, to cope with the emotions that we're having, right? So food isn't the problem. And we're not addicted to food in the same way that we're addicted to, like hardcore drugs, right? Or alcohol even. We don't create the same kind of level of dependence or any of those things. So the jury is still out. The research is flawed. There's not a lot of research on it. And so, my vote is the majority of the time, no. I used to think I was addicted to food, and I thought that I couldn't trust myself with having candy in the house or whatever. And now I have it in my house all the time, and it's not a problem. So by finding a way that addresses the underlying issues, I've now healed my relationship with food.
So is that one of the basis of intuitive eating then, is going for the underlying feelings and dealing with those versus taking it out in what you're eating?
Absolutely. Yes. So rather than trying to control and manage food in our bodies, instead it is addressing the underlying issues, so that because the food kind of having things be out of balance, or using food in a way that doesn't feel good and doesn't feel in alignment with the way you want it to be, is a symptom of something else. It's not the problem. And so diet culture says, oh, there's something wrong with you. The way you relate to food is the problem. We need to manage that. And then that doesn't last. We can never, right? And then we're kind of stuck feeling like there's something bad or wrong with us because we couldn't manage it, right? So intuitive eating world says, like, let's sit with that discomfort. Let's figure out what's really going on, and address the underlying issue. And then the things with food really balance themselves out naturally and beautifully.
Yeah, that's lovely. I like that. And then you're getting rid of the shame. There's so much shame around food and our bodies and how we look, and, unfounded. So this seems like a pretty healthy way then to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you bring that up. Shame is so ingrained in us, right? Around these things. And it is so damaging, because when we have that shame, we kind of go into this automatic patterns and these automatic wirings say, you're not good enough, you're not good enough. And then what does that make you want to do? Then you feel more stressed and agitated, and then you want to eat. But you think, oh, there's something wrong because I ate. No, there's something wrong because you feel like you're not good enough.
Yes. Yes, good point. I remember like when I was in my early 30s and, focusing more on what I look like and all that. I was hiking with my mom, and I remember I was just like fascinated or focused on it. And I said to her, "Hey, Mom, what age are you when you stop thinking about your body? Where you're just happy and you." And I said, "Do you feel that way now?" She's like, "Yes." And she must have been, I don't know, 65. And I'm like, "Well, did you feel that way at 60?" "Yes." So, we went down the list. And then I said, "Well, when did it stop?" She said, "When you want it to stop." And it was
Oh,
like this eye-opening thing, like, oh, it can stop today and I can feel good about myself. So from that moment on, I thank her for those words of wisdom, you know.
that I love your mom. That's
I
incredible.
know, I know.
I'm like, I gotta write that down. Fortunately, we can listen to this podcast again,
Yeah,
right?
totally, totally. So what are just one or two things that you can leave us with that would help us struggling right now during this time, kind of getting a hold of our eating and in a healthier way?
Yeah. I would say, have grace with yourself. Again, get curious and, um, really this idea of how can we start to not necessarily love ourselves, because that's really far for a lot of people, but learning to have respect and acceptance and compassion and kindness towards yourself. Looking at, how can I be nurturing to myself on all levels, right?
Yeah, that's lovely. And I think that all of us could relate to that right now. A little bit more self-love and nurturing for us. Of course, we're out there right now trying to make the change in the world and do what's right. But with that comes then taking care of us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. We have to take care of ourselves so that we are resourced enough to go do the work we want to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I went on your fabulous website and you have some really cool programs on there working with you for like 6 months and many other different options. And your website is coachtiffanyrn.com, and I'll make sure that I have the link into the show notes for that. And thank you so much for coming on. I've learned so much about this and the eating tied to the racist roots. That's fascinating to me. Just absolutely fascinating. So,
Yeah, I think, in the coming weeks, I think that will become more, how all of these systems are kind of collectively oppressing people, I think, and how, these various systems are tied to, I was watching the 13th Amendment. Yeah, there's like
yeah.
a movie list going around on Facebook, and man, I learned so much about, our history that I didn't know. So how all of this impacts us. And so thank you so much
Yes.
for having me on. I really enjoy your podcast. It's been lovely to chat with you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany.